Hello my friends, this is Dr. M. To continue your journey with intermediate microeconomics, we are back to discuss homothetic preferences and how it could help us with everyday life. Where we left last time with the previous video, we talked about gambling and where does gambling start. Basically, gambling is related to the lack of information. When people play the lottery, they basically play the odds against them. And frankly, every moment you wake up in the morning, that's what gambling is all about. You are gambling with your life. I mean, who is to say that the ceiling is not going to collapse upon us, or some sort of virus does not migrate into our system, compromising immune support. It's just uncertainty. The presence of uncertainty makes process gambling. Now, you can diversify some of this risk away, and with investment decisions, when it comes making certain investments in stocks, bonds, real estate, and some other instruments, you are essentially trying to get some information. And the more information you have, the more you are informed, the less chance for you to lose your money and experience bad decisions. Now, there's still a chance that you can be at loss, but information rules and really helps you to make the decisions. For example, United States Congress people just recently have been accused of inside trading. So they receive certain information before anybody else, and if it was a bad information, they dump the stocks, they sell it, and if it was a good information, they basically buy the stocks. And that's what is related to inside trading. So you see that they are making decisions based on information, whether legally or illegally, it's beyond the scope of the class. But people make decisions based on information, and the more information they have, the more chances for desirable outcome. So it is about gambling versus informed decision. Let's talk about the lottery. Lottery is, or winning the lottery, oftentimes is equivalent to surviving 26 heart attacks. And typically people don't survive more than 2 or 3, typically. And to survive 26, you can see the odds of successful outcome. That's what lottery is. So there are 2 reasons, at least, that I should say one should never play the lottery. Number one, it's uninformed decision. You're basically playing your odds so much against you that it makes almost a foolishness to engage in such behavior. The reason number 2, what if you win? If you win, you know what is happening to your homothetic preferences. Your budget constraint will shift outward. Look at the previous presentation at the graph. Your budget constraint will shift outward suddenly. And one of the problems with winning of the lottery, or winners of the lottery experience, they all of a sudden jumping from this budget constraint to this, and there is no time to adjust. There is no time to adjust. So this is a very large jump, and they have to overcome this much difference that ultimately taxing their spiritual life, their emotional life, their physical life, and it may look very attractive from the side, but adjustments are so expensive that it destroys most people who win the lottery. And I'll give you a third reason, just to drive this home. The third reason, my friends, statistically, most people who play the lottery typically do not understand the law of probability. So what I just shared with you is not available for most people who play the lottery. They don't understand and they don't know the odds and the probability of winning. When I say it's equivalent to surviving 26 heart attacks. So that leads us to consider that most people who play the lottery are uneducated and poor individuals. So the lottery is endorsed by the infinite wisdom of the government that the proceeds go to support education. How cool is it to support education at the expense of uneducated and at the expense of poor individuals? This is ridiculous. And this is unfortunate as well. So I would always discourage people from playing the lottery for those three reasons, to say the least. So the public education, and for the sake of public education, to play the lottery that robs uneducated and poor people is just gives a bad taste to my mouth. All right, let me go to the next slide. And I want to finish homothetic preference discussion today. And I want to move towards some of the readings. St. John of Kronstadt, 1897, beautifully reflected on homothetic preference, basically stating, do not forget yourself in looking upon the beauty of a human face, but look upon the soul. And that was also stating in regards to the man's garment. Do not look upon the man's garment, the body being his temporary garment, but look upon him who is clothed in it. Magnificence of the mansion. Do not admire the magnificence of the mansion, but look upon the dweller who lives in it and what he is. Otherwise you offend the image of God in the man and will dishonor the being by worshiping his servants, idols in this case. My friends, I want to reiterate homothetic preference and its power. Remember when Apostle Paul stated that what is the common between the righteousness and wickedness? I want you to think about paradise when Adam and Eve were at the time enjoying this beautiful place called paradise, and the serpent tempted Eve. Basically, he didn't approach Adam, but he came to Eve, and Adam compromised and basically gave up his utility for her sake when she offered him to taste forbidden fruit. And I wonder what would happen if the history of mankind would change if he would stand his ground. So I want you to appreciate the fact that homothetic preferences can save the marriage, and it also could destroy both. Since Adam and Eve were kicked out from the paradise and we are subjected to this life and everything that this life has to offer, including pain and suffering and deterioration, aging, and finally death. All right, the next thing, and I want to finish this presentation with the statement of the following. There was a Russian Tsar, Alexander I. He was a warrior, and he saved Europe in 1812. He basically was able to defeat Napoleon. And just for you to appreciate what Napoleon meant for Europeans, even to this date, some mothers tell very strictly to their kids, small kids, if you're going to misbehave, I'm going to call Napoleon and he will come and get you. So you see that Napoleon and his atrocities that flooded Europe in 1812 remembered to that date. And he was unstoppable. He conquered every single nation that stood on his way, and it seems like no one could stop Napoleon from taking over the world until this young Tsar and warrior Alexander I staged the battle, famous battle, where he defeated Napoleon, and at that moment he becomes very famous. At that moment, for the same reason of his victory and liberation of the entire Europe. And at that moment of this victory, he becomes very wealthy because all the nations that were liberated from Napoleon started to send gifts and wealth to Alexander I. So here's the man who experienced, let me go to the notepad and illustrate that, what it looks like on the graph. Here's the man who experienced sudden change in his life when it comes to marrying Jesus. So he was in this proximity from Jesus, and suddenly with his victory over Napoleon, he moves this far. Again, the glory and wealth come to him so suddenly over this victory. And one day he decides to travel to Crimea. Crimea is a resort place on the Black Sea, and it took at that time many days by horse to travel. And he always had small army accompany him to protect him. So, and one day as he was traveling to Crimea, sudden news that spread out across the world that shocked everyone. And this news was Alexander I was assassinated. What was interesting about this, that none of his small army suffered the losses. It was very mysterious assassination. No one could explain how it happened and why, besides Alexander I, no one died. Because he always had somebody close to him to protect him at all times. So there was an order to transport a deceased body back to Moscow for proper burial, and due to the decaying nature, since it takes so many days to travel for the body, due to the decaying nature, no one was allowed to open the coffin at the time. So they staged the proper burial, and they essentially made it so everyone would follow those orders. But the mystery remained until very recently how it happened. And a few years later, after this published assassination of Alexander I, someone essentially claimed that they saw a monk in Siberia that looked like Alexander I. And if that was true, then what you see is incredible transformation of homothetic preference. So that is the move from point A to point B. So he can be married to Jesus to cut the distance of travel between those two indifference curves. That would be the overcoming this distance. So the Russians decided to solve the mystery, and they wanted to understand if that was true, what this legend stated throughout the history for such a long time. So they decided to dig up the coffin from the grave and open it. And once they open it, and it happened fairly recently, they discovered it was empty. So if that was the true story in terms of Alexander I had to give up his glory, his wealth, his aristocracy, and everything that a man can enjoy in this life, just for the sake to reduce the price to be married to Jesus, that is a very humble transformation. If you look through the biblical discussions, you will find very quickly that God loves humble people. And if you meet humble people in life, it becomes a very memorable encounter. In part, what makes humble people so special, they give up their utility for someone's sake at a relatively ease, with relatively no efforts. And thus the marriage to such humble people is inexpensive. So one of the things that you want to take away from here, if you met a person that is your future bride or future groom and has this characteristics of humbleness, it is an asset that will sustain you through marriage. And it's just the greatest asset that you can find. I'd like to conclude this presentation with Apostle Paul that he wrote in Philippians. And basically he said, I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And what I want you to understand, that typically we think that it takes a skill to be poor, because it takes the skill how you can ration your limited number of the resources, whether it's cash, whether it's clothing, shelter, or any other resource. Yes, it does take a skill, but it also takes a skill to be wealthy. And I'm not at all clear what is more difficult, to be wealthy and not to lose yourself with this wealth, or to be poor and have a greater probability of finding yourself. So that's an interesting lesson that we can certainly benefit from discussion of homothetic preferences. Thank you, my friends, and we're going to stop this presentation for now. We'll see you soon.